Callie. Your ex-boyfriend's latest romance has brought him unprecedented fame, Marina grinned, flicking her fingers through the pages of a glossy magazine. They even write about it here. It wasn't a tabloid sketch that made Andre famous, snorted Alina, brewing coffee, but his disappearance. If he hadn't disappeared, there was no way in hell anyone would have read that novel. There was an awkward silence in the studio. Alina froze, staring at the pale pink patterns on the wallpaper. Marina put the magazine aside and climbed up on the wide windowsill, pulling her knees to her chest. She pressed her face against the cold glass, watching the passing cars below, which seemed so toy-like from this height, and the people looked like miniatures for dollhouses. Realizing that Alina was not going to say anything and the silence was squeezing her throat, Marina turned around and smiled tautly. The young writer escaped with a new muse. Almost a historical classic, as scripted. Although, I admit, it sounds lousy in real life. Try to forget him, she tried to cheer her up, or at least distract her friend, but she hadn't smiled once in days. Alina only hummed, pursing her already thin lips and frowning, devouring one cup of coffee after another and constantly taking notes in her notebook, the pages of which she tore off and crumpled and threw away. Almost 2 weeks had passed since Andre's disappearance. The noise of the radio and newspaper headlines had already subsided, no longer weighing on Alina. Day after day she sat on the couch, crossed her arms across her chest, and drilled into the short bookshelf with Andre's books, which had never found the fame the writer dreamed of. Now the fame of his latest novel was like a mocking joke of fate on Andre himself and their life together. The pain of loss was poisoned by a creeping madness, an incomprehension of how this could have happened. I wish I knew who this muse was, Alina murmured, staring up at the ceiling with her eyes glassy with exhaustion. She tapped her index finger on the countertop thoughtfully, and moved her lips together without a sound. Marina climbed down from the windowsill and patted her friend on the shoulder, sympathetically shaking her head. In the novel he calls her Callie. A redhead with gray eyes, turned on the order. I don't know what you'd find in a girl like that, but I guess your writer knows better. Good riddance to him, and it's time for you to exhale, to relax. When was the last time you slept? Marina was worried about her friend. Seeing Alina in a broken state was unbearable for her, although she could not find an ounce of sympathy for the missing writer. The lanky young man, hovering in his own fantasies, had never liked her, causing only irritation. Marina had always assumed that his affair with her friend would end this way, thinking Andre too windy. Callie. Does such a name even exist? Alina murmured, turning her gaze to Marina as if she were waiting for an answer. She let all the questions about herself slip past her ears, only occasionally voicing scraps of her own thoughts like a fever. I wouldn't care about that, change it for me with a girl. I'm not sure that Callie or her prototype is a living person. Alina felt weightless, without support under her feet or any sense of what might have happened. All she had left of Andre were books, memories, and a pile of ghostly hunches, written down with trembling hands on the pages of a notebook, based only on one strange event, which sometimes, especially in the morning, seemed like a dream to her. The girl exhaled, clenched her fist impotently, and took a sip of her coffee, trying to drive away the oppressive drowsiness. She bit her lower lip and grimaced as if in pain. Marina wanted to hug her, but Alina pulled her away, shaking her blonde head. I have to tell you something. I visited Andre shortly before he disappeared. He was complaining that he couldn't find inspiration in the city and decided to rent a small house in Oran to work on. I didn't mind. I understand, for creative people sometimes you need a change of scenery, and Oran is really quite beautiful. At first everything was fine. He sent me excerpts from the novel, saying that he had finally found inspiration, but then Andrew began to put off coming to town, saying that he was caught up in a new work. He stopped sending me what he was writing, saying he wanted me to read it all later. After a month, this drove me mad, and I raced to him. He met me at the bus stop, though I didn't tell him I was coming. We had a nice talk, he calmed me down and explained himself, but then he decided to introduce me to Callie. Andrew talked about her all the way in such a tone that I assumed she was renting him a room in the mansion. I was expecting to see some weird old lady. He always liked such cartoonish people. But when we got to the mansion, he talked to nothing. He turned to Callie, looking into the void, pointing to my empty chair with his hand. Andrew talked as if he could see her, and I was blind. I don't know to this day which of the two of us went crazy then. A monstrous prank after such a separation. I ran away. And for a week I couldn't find the strength to even call him. Even when the publisher told me he was in town, I didn't want to see him. Why didn't you tell that to the police? Marina was excited, but immediately clicked her tongue, though it didn't sound very plausible. So he started seeing a ghost, dedicated a novel to her, came back to town, published it, and vanished? It sounds like nonsense, if you put it that way, Alina replied, rubbing the bridge of her nose. I want to go to that house. Maybe I can find something. It's cynical, but I want to believe that Andrew is just crazy, or has run off with some girl, making this spectacle, afraid to confess. Once I'm sure of that, I can let him go. By the way, have you read the novel? Marina asked, deciding not to say what she thought of the ghost story. I'm on the 3rd chapter. Alina clutched the cup with both hands, feeling the heated porcelain begin to burn her palms. She swallowed hard, contemplating that she would have to slip into the mansion from the pages as if in pursuit of a white rabbit, trying to preserve her own sanity. Yes, I started it, but I didn't get beyond a few pages. I can't read about him praising that Callie. It makes me sick, Alina admitted, and then added, twitching her shoulder nervously, the truth is, I never liked the female protagonists in his books. Even when he copied them from me. I want to go out tonight and see if I can find out more about Callie. It's a short drive, and I'll be there in the morning. I'll be back in 2 days, Alina finally said after a few minutes of awkward silence. Marina sympathetically shook her head as she looked at her worried and sleep-deprived friend. Maybe it's not worth the trip. The police found nothing, the case is closed. He just ran away. Andre had always been a bit of a windbag. Remember how he... Alina didn't let her friend finish, raising her hand to silence her. I worry about you. It's hard to survive a loss like that, but you realize you're chasing something that doesn't exist. Why don't we go out this evening? Marina suggested that she put her arm around her shoulders. Alina slipped out of her arms and went into the corridor, thinking about something of her own. I'm sorry. Maybe you're right, Alina replied absent-mindedly, and, tossing an awkward see you later, she disappeared into the stairwell, hurrying down the stairs. Marina wanted to be indignant, but understood that Alina would not hear her, and, locking the door, returned to the kitchen. Marina wanted to be indignant, but understood that Alina could not hear her, locking the door and returning to the kitchen. Rubbing her temples, the girl returned to the room and picked up Andre's last book from the couch. She knew that if Alina was convinced of something, it was useless to talk her out of it, so she decided to distract herself by reading. She found the novel not bad and somewhat intriguing, though she would never admit it out loud. Marina froze, examining the cover of the novel. The illustrator had done a good job. Callie looked adorable, like a statue. After her conversation with Alina, it seemed to Marina that there was something detached, ghostly in her figure, facial features, as if there was more of a porcelain doll in her than a person. She looked dull against the backdrop of the mansion, and the gray shawl covering her dirty orange dress only reinforced that impression. Her red hair, tied up with a blue ribbon at the ends, formed 2 neat ponytails, and her gray eyes looked from the cover to something far away, to something far beyond the picture. Marina opened the book and immersed herself in reading. After my long wanderings, Callie became a good friend, taking me in. Her mansion became my home, as if I had always been a part of it. I especially loved the evenings we spent together in the living room, drinking cup after cup of tea and talking for hours about everything. I would tell her about the world I had seen with my own eyes, and she would tell me about the world she had read about in books. Callie rarely left the mansion, much less the outskirts of her town, terrified of the huge buildings and people far beyond the dense forest that braided Oran. I found her timidity and prejudices amusing, but she was so sure of them that even within a month I had no way of influencing her views. Soon I began to realize that I didn't want to leave Callie at all, but I had to stay with her and become a statue and a permanent resident of her cozy little world. She didn't want to let me go at all, curling her plump lips and looking at me pleadingly every time I talked about going to the big city, but she never objected out loud. However, one sad look from her was enough to postpone my departure each time. Oran was an ordinary town, transformed over the years from a rural settlement to a quiet place that came alive only in the summer, when the townspeople moved to their summer cottages. In the fall it gradually fell silent, and among its inhabitants there remained the unfriendly residents who had decided to live out their years without leaving its environs. Alina got off the bus at a ramshackle bus stop that had a handwritten sign with faded paint that read, "Welcome to Oran." She'd been lucky. In a week's time, the buses would stop running here. She kicked the brown-stained foliage with her sneaker nose and moved deeper into town, looking at the small houses she'd ignored the last time she'd rushed to Andre's house. Since her last visit the streets had become deserted, and for a moment she thought the town had fallen asleep at all, but then a stout man in his 50s came out of the gate at the end of the street. His hair was already turning gray. Alina hurriedly caught up with him and stretched her lips in a polite smile. "Good morning," she said, glancing uncertainly up at the dark gray sky that bordered the horizon with the giant forest that separated Oran from the rest of the civilized world. "Morning," the man grunted, not wanting to stop. "I am a journalist, writing notes on legends from outlying settlements. Could you spare me some time?" Alina muttered, remembering how she had interviewed famous writers and artists before. The man frowned. "Not much, really. But I wouldn't say we have anything interesting here. Just a couple of stories about one house," he said, averting his gaze. "Some of the buildings are notorious. They're often made up out of boredom." "What's the story?" Alina asked, hoping she didn't sound too strange. The native shuffled his heavy boots, hid his hands in his pockets, and muttered something unintelligible. He sped up, determined not to continue the conversation. "You wouldn't trouble yourself with silly rumors. We have a lovely quiet town. Take a rest." He brushed her off, but Alina followed him insistently, repeating, "Tell me." "I'm not a guide," the man remarked grudgingly, but noticing the worried look of the girl, he gave up. "There's a story about a house near the main square. It was built a long time ago. It's one of the first houses in the city, and always attracted creative and strange personalities. No wonder the locals started making up legends about it. It is said that the first owner of the house, a young architect, was a good craftsman, but he was very unlucky in love. He was so desperate that he either invented or called a girl, about whom he began to tell everyone. Naturally, no one believed him, as they only saw him alone. One day he disappeared, and that was it. He liked to drink at the end. Everyone told him that it would not do any good. So it's not ghosts that ruin people, it's just too much free time and empty fantasies. You have to work, and then you will have a girl and a healthy head." At the end of the story the man got heated, and went to the instructive intonation. They had just passed by the mansion they were talking about. He did not even glance at him as they passed, as if he had deliberately lowered his gaze to the scraped sidewalk. "Thank you," Alina replied dryly, glancing over her shoulder at the cast-iron fence of the stately mansion that towered over the modest neighboring houses. She hurried to get rid of the man who had finally recommended an apartment where she could stay for a couple of days. They were situated on the opposite side of town, away from the mansion. The owner of the apartment was an old woman named Katrina. She protested for a few minutes, saying that the season for her renting a room had already passed, and she wanted a quick break from summer guests, but Alina managed to beg her. Her lips and cheeks were already sore from her pretended polite smile. "Katrina, don't you know anything about such a gloomy house?" "It caught my attention," Alina inquired, as if out of curiosity. "And you don't know anything about the guy who disappeared a few weeks ago?" Katrina parried, handing her the keys to the room. Alina turned dark and nodded, squeezing her eyes shut painfully, wiping away the tears that had accumulated in the corners of her eyes, a moment's weakness from fatigue. Katrina's gaze flickered anxiously around the room and her guest. "We don't like to talk about this house. It's caused a lot of unhappiness in our town, but the authorities refuse to tear it down because they think it's a trap for tourists. but they don't care about us. Rumors and legends, they say. I suppose we're all legends to them, the woman grumbled. Please tell me the legend, Alina asked, it's important to me. All right, Katrina agreed easily, with a stern look, I'll tell it, but after you give me one word. You must have enough of a story to keep your promise. Okay, Alina sat down on the edge of her bed, tapping her fingers impatiently on the wooden knob, ready to finally hear what she might consider the truth. It was a long time ago, when the locals first began to develop the area. Because of its location behind the forest, it attracted few people. There's a river, but the soil is stony, it's hard to grow crops. And yet, looking for a place for themselves, people were ready to settle here. A talented young man from a distant land happened to be among them. But he was not looking for a better life, but for peace. They say he was a very talented architect and sculptor. Now, he is called Monner, but hardly anyone has retained the young man's real name in his memory. He was very young, but always sad and shunned people. He sought love, but did not want to share his feelings with any of the living girls. Their loud voices, boiling esmores, and tinkling laughter only disgusted him. He had been less strangled by his longing while he had built his abode, the very mansion that now loomed over the city. And then he locked himself in it, completely in the grip of alcohol and despondency. For a long time no one heard anything about him. But after a few years they began to say that they had seen two silhouettes in his windows. One of them belonged to Monner without a doubt, but the second silhouette was female and always followed him, but never approached him. Finally Monner disappeared completely, as if he had evaporated, and his house was bought by a wealthy composer who decided to turn it into his summer residence. History and people have forgotten his name. The musician suffered an unfortunate fate. He withered away in a few years, leaving behind only a few sad pieces about unrequited love, although before that he had been a cheerful and healthy man. Because of his illness, he spent more and more time in the house, and in his last winter he did not leave the mansion at all, as he usually did. In the evenings there was music coming from the covered windows that he played, but some were convinced that they heard a quiet woman's voice singing the tunes, and it was sweet, enchanting, like a siren's voice. But apart from silhouettes and scraps of words at the end of the melodies, no one could distinguish or recognize anything, although people were already beginning to wonder what kind of girl shared the loneliness of the mansion walls, and its unfortunate owners. The composer passed away in late spring. Doctors were unable to help him. For several decades the mansion stood empty. It was feared to be both approached and destroyed. The city prospered, fearful speculation subsided, and then the house was sold to an artist. I can't remember his name either, but his surname was funny, Zora. That was his nickname, Sir Zora, because he was not from here, and had something of the prim English in him. Zora did not object to his nickname, and the rare warnings about the bad influences at home did not frighten him. He painted gloomy pictures and believed that death, and the inevitability of fate were his best muses. Sometimes he would exhibit small canvases in the street in front of the house in good weather, setting up a bidding war. Residents bought his paintings rarely, but they loved to gawk at the monsters and branchy night landscapes. But one day a girl appeared on Zogra's canvases. She was a redhead with big gray eyes. I heard that she looked from the canvases so wistfully, as if she had mourned all the sadness of this world, and at the same time her face expressed perfect indifference, as if she were a doll. Zogra said she was his true friend and the pinnacle of his art. All his creations were reduced to her alone, which quickly bored the auctioneers, critics, and his customers. Left destitute, Zogra seemingly left town, taking all of his canvases, although no one saw him leave. After that, the house, stigmatized by notoriety, remained empty until recently. Interesting story, said Alina thoughtfully, trying to put all the pieces of the past into a single tangle with the events of the past weeks. Thank you. You're welcome, answered Katerina, folding her fingers into a lock. And now your promise, don't go to this mansion. Better yet, leave here tomorrow morning with the first bus. This house and its stories have already taken too many lives. I promise, the girl murmured, rubbing the strap of the bag that held her notebook. Alina was not going to keep her word. Her only goal was to get into the house at any cost. Her feet were leading her there by themselves. It seemed to her that she would be able to find in the mansion those answers that were not visible to the police or to curious ghost seekers. That this was the mystery that would lay in the palm of her hand an open book. As Alina raced down the slick road to the mansion, it felt as if all the townsfolk had now gathered at their windows and were watching her, seeing her off with condemning or sympathetic glances. But the girl tried not to think about it and ran faster, looking only at the black roof of the mansion's tower, which had become a dark beacon for her. There was no lock on the massive gate, but it was unnecessary. The mechanism was rusted through, and the door did not yield. Alina remembered how easy it had been for Andre to open and walk into the rotten garden. It had once been stately, but now the ornamental plants, strangled by ivy and weeds, and the statues, half-ruined and blackened, were withering without care, a depressing sight. The girl stared into the forgotten thickets for a long time, and then looked around to make sure no one could see her now. The dusty road was empty, and the windows of the neighboring houses without light looked like blind eyes that stared senselessly at the deserted street. Alina grabbed hold of the curls of the fence and climbed over, shaking off the cracked black paint in her palms. She pulled herself up and clumsily climbed over the fence, dropping a pile of rain-rotting leaves that had fallen off the sprawling trees. She did not feel like lingering in the garden, shaking off the leaves she had stuck to her clothes as she made her way toward the porch. Alina slipped into the entryway, pushing open the heavy wooden door with great difficulty. The carpet beneath her feet on her first steps chapped like a swamp from the moisture that had soaked it. The door and walls of the hallway at the entrance were shabby and dirty, just as you'd expect in an abandoned manor house. But beyond that, it seemed to Alina that time had no power or mercy over the rest of the mansion's rooms. They were all well-groomed, almost devoid of dust, with books and statuettes nestled everywhere, arranged by a caring hand. A viscous lump came to Alina's throat, she coughed and the sound echoed through all the corners, but there was no response. "Callie, you have company. Come out and meet them." Alina shouted the last word into the darkness that covered the stairs leading to the second floor. Her voice was echoed in the far-flung rooms. Alina didn't know what would be worse, to hear the answer clearly, or to feel the absolute silence of the empty house begin to suffocate her, making her question her own sanity. She shadowed from room to room, wondering how terrifying it would be to see a woman's silhouette caught in one of them by the window, but the mansion was empty. It looked as if it had been left unattended by its owners, who, of course, were ordinary people, and they should return at daybreak. Alina felt awkward, funny, and to the point of shivering to keep treading in the dark going into the center of the mansion. The living room, the sprawling circular mouth of the house. The dark green wallpaper was stained from old age and faded, but otherwise the living room was in excellent condition. Even the books and dishes were neatly arranged on shelves and glass cabinets, and the wood was stacked evenly in a pile. Alina walked over to the fireplace, looking tiredly at the collection of porcelain figurines on it. They represented 4 men, and a 5th graceful figurine represented a girl. The statuettes were of very high quality and Alina took hold of the artist's figure. He had long brown hair, several strands of which fell on his forehead, covering his eyes, and he was dressed in loose pants, a striped turtleneck, a black beret, and a white apron smeared with paint. The man was handsome, but his face expressed sadness. Alina felt something tighten in her chest as she took the figure in her hands. She hastily placed it on the mantelpiece and began to look at the others, but without touching them. A sculptor with tools, a musician at a piano, a painter, and a writer with a pile of papers in his hands. Alina took the writer off and began to spin him from all sides, carefully trying to convince herself that he looked nothing like Andrew. Only the color of his hair and eyes were similar, but his clothes were old-fashioned, he would never wear them. Alina was interrupted from her thoughts by the phone ringing, which sounded like a bell to the service in the silence. She almost dropped the statuette, but, pulling herself together, answered the phone. "Hi. I'm glad I could reach you." Marina's usually upbeat and firm voice sounded hesitant. "Listen, I know this is going to sound really stupid, but you should leave town. I finished the novel, and I have a strange feeling after reading it." "What is it?" Alina asked dryly, turning the porcelain statuette of the writer in her hands, trying to get a better look at its features in the moonlight that filtered through the dusty and cracked stained glass window on the first floor. "I tell you, it's silly." Marina was embarrassed, and she was careful to choose every word. "The novel isn't really about Callie. I mean, she's not exactly the romantic sort of person she seems in the first few chapters. It's more of a cautionary tale for you. Don't go in the house, okay? It's silly, of course, but some mysteries are better off staying mysteries. Come back." "All right," Alina agreed, putting the writer on the shelf. It seemed to her that it belonged there, though a strange feeling arose, the desire to take this statue with her, to bring it to life, as if in a fairy tale. "Where are you now?" Marina asked, beginning to worry. "You didn't go into that mansion, did you?" "Of course not," Alina said. "I'm at the hotel. I'm going to bed. There's nothing I could find out." "I guess you were right." The girl slowly reached for the statue of a red-haired girl in a gray dress. "I'll see you tomorrow." "You were right," Alina said with a disappointed look, twisting the strands of blonde hair dislodged from the two ponytails tied with ribbons onto her thin fingers. She shrugged and took a sip of her favorite coffee. Marina sat on the windowsill with her knees drawn up to her chest, and looked out the window, gazing into the distance. The architect had given Callie a form, an image into which he had somehow breathed life. The musician gave her a voice, the painter of color, refined her image. Marina retold the plot of the book, but her hands trembled finally. "You really didn't go to the house?" "No. I tried, but there's such a fence, it's suicidal." And the woman I rented a room from recounted this legend to me briefly. Andrew gave Callie her soul, her character traits, being a writer. Now she can have peace as a real human soul. "I'll miss Andre, wherever he goes." Alina turned to the sink, carefully washing the coffee traces off her cup. Marina silently bored her friends back with a worried look for a few minutes. "No. That's not how the book ended." "And how does it end?" Alina asked over her shoulder, not taking her eyes off the rough porcelain the mug was made of. "I'm sorry," said Marina, and then she stopped talking, and then laughed a little tautly at her own words. "I shouldn't read bedtime stories. Andre described it very vividly." "Yeah, I know. I can be impressionable too." Alina set the cup down on the shelf and headed out into the hallway. "I'll see you tonight?" "You wanted to go out." "Sorry, I'm afraid I'm busy tonight." "I'll see you some other time," Marina murmured, handing Alina her gray coat.